Hey, welcome back. I'm Dr. Dean, chiropractor of sports medicine.
I'm John Aldrich, athlete of sports. Welcome to ProFunction.
Welcome to ProFunction. Today we're going to be talking about stretching and flexibility, safety, and how to do it correctly. Hey, John.
Oh, hey, dude.
What you doing?
I was actually just reading up on stretching, actually. You know I play tennis.
Right.
So I was just watching the Australian Open, and one of the announcers was actually... great tourney.
Yeah.
And so one of the announcers actually was talking about how important flexibility is in tennis, and they were talking about stretching. So I figured I would actually look into it and see what actually are the benefits, why is it important,
Right.
what are the dangers maybe, how often I should be doing it, how it will play into being
Right.
more functional in tennis. And I actually had a question for you.
Uh-huh.
What's the difference between flexibility and stretching?
Okay, so good point about the tennis. There's a lot of movement, a lot of
Right.
motion, a lot of quick acceleration, deceleration in tennis,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of opportunity for injury, right?
Absolutely.
So flexibility really is talking about a joint. Will my joint move through a range of motion safely, right? Help me with my game, give me my shot.
Right.
Stretching more is about the connective tissue, the muscle, the tendon, the ligaments that aid in that flexible range of motion.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
In fact, you know what? Let me take you over to the whiteboard and let's talk about it some more.
Let's dive in.
Great.
Oh.
All right, John. So let's talk about ROM, range of motion. Range of motion.
Good old ROM.
Yeah. And we're talking about joints. So I really let's bring tennis into this one.
Yeah.
Okay. And so let's talk about the backhand.
Okay.
All right. For an example, so we have 4 ranges of motion. The first one is called AROM. That's active. We call that active range of motion. That means what can you do on your own? What's your backhand look like if you're holding a racket, you
Right.
pull back, you pull through? What does that range of motion look like? It's what's possible for you.
Right.
And that's a very safe range of motion, usually. The second one is called PROM, passive range of motion. And no, we're not going to the prom. Passive range of motion. Okay, so the difference between these two is that passive, you could do to yourself, and you could have a helper. So, for example, I could pull my arm back, and that's a range of motion. I can twist, pull back from my backhand.
That's active. Okay.
Right, that's active. Passive, I could pin my arm maybe against the wall and turn, right? And I'm getting more stretch here than I would if I was just pulling my own arm back.
More than you could.
Yeah, on my own. I'm using the wall to
Assistance.
help me, right? Or I could have somebody like you, and you could really stretch me. Oh, that feels good. Stretch me really back further than I can go. So helper or self,
Okay.
right? Now, in both of these are both based on feel.
Okay.
How does this feel? And I say, oh, I take my backhand, I feel really loose, I feel like I can do that. You help me stretch, I feel like, wow, that feels really good. I like that. It's based on feel.
Okay.
The third one is called functional range of motion. Functional,
We love that here.
profunction. Functional, and what does that mean? So now we're starting to talk about sport specific maybe, right? Lifestyle specific maybe, something.
Whatever.
Or it could
different for
also
each
just
person.
be, what do you like? What works for you? I don't really need to be super flexible. You know, I get along just great the way I am. I like my stretches. I don't
Right.
need to be more flexible. But let's say in your backhand, right? Let's say in the backhand, I pull back, right? Well, what if my chest is really tight? I'm doing a lot of bench presses, whatever.
It's going to be
Right.
harder for you
And I'm trying to pull back, right? So that's not really being functional for me,
for the specific
for my
sport of
for
tennis.
our tennis, right? So I need to increase my functional range of motion, but maybe that range of motion that doesn't work for tennis works for me every day. I'm totally fine. So we talk about functional range of motion. We're talking about a very specific range of motion that works for the sport that might even be a little smaller than an active range of motion. It might even be smaller than a passive range of motion.
Depending, yeah, like we talked
Right.
about tennis with like the forehand, and not necessarily even a good thing for overall your life later on. And that's something as an athlete that we deal with the negative repercussions
Right.
of like doing this range of motion over and over and over, which is functional for the sport, but maybe not going to be functional for
Right.
you later on that you put up with,
Yeah,
depending on your goal.
right. So not based on feel, but based on expectations. What does my sport need to be providing to me? Right?
To be the most functional.
To be the most functional. And then the last one we're going to talk about is RROM. And RROM,
Do we save the best for last?
RROM is really going to incorporate all three of these. This is rehab, range of motion. So doesn't mean something's particularly wrong, but it's the retraining process. So,
Okay.
so rehab range of motion, let's say again for a backhand, I'm going to, in a very small, slow way, I'm going to teach this joint to open up, to be flexible, and I'm also going to have a little more elasticity or stretchability in the muscle, the connective tissue. So this is where we talk about increments. So
teaching your body new range of motion through small increments.
small changes that can become long-term improvements so that you become more functional, right?
Right.
And then what the result of this actually leads to, again, what we're all about is an active, functional range of motion. That's our goal.
So it sounds like it's got everything we need in it.
Right.
Active, and it's functional, and then range of motion, of course. That's
Right.
Sports is all motion.
Sport specific.
Right.
Right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to erase the board, start over, and now we have to talk a little bit about anatomy.
Let's dive in.
Okay, John, so I did a quick little schematic here. I need to put joint. So we're going to pick the leg. There's a foot. And what I drew here are the two bones, the tendon, and the muscle. And so muscle fibers go the entire length of the muscle belly. So of course, when this muscle contracts, let's say this is your quads, they contract, and the two ends of the muscle come together. And this would be like in a kick, for example, right? Your leg would kick out because the muscles got shorter. Now, what I want to point out here, what I want you to make a very specific point about is the tendon doesn't just end right there and then it's muscle and then it starts again and comes here. The tendon becomes connective tissue that goes all the way through that muscle. You see that? It goes all the way through. So technically, this is the muscle belly. There's tendon, and there's more tendon. This is an attachment up here at that bone. This is an attachment here at this bone. And in between the two here behind this muscle is the joint. So tendon all the way through. Keep track of that. So the next thing I'm going to show you is the functional unit of the muscle. So I'm going to take a little slice right through that muscle there, and I'm going to draw one unit that's called a sarcomere. And believe it or not, this is going to help you understand stretching a lot. So my muscle fibers are attached to that end plate like this, and then to this end plate like this. And what I want you to see here, John, is that there is a certain amount of overlap. Do you see that? So the fibers are coming from this and fibers are coming from that. So what happens when there's a muscle contraction is these fibers like this, like my fingers, so this is going to get a nervous impulse and it's going to draw the two ends together, right? Until this hits that and these hit that. So it's going to draw it together. That's your muscle contraction. So this overlap zone is natural resting length of the muscle. So let's just say in our backhand, like my chest muscle, there's fibers coming this way and this way, right? My natural resting length is here. So my natural resting length could also be here, or my natural resting length could be here. It depends on my choices, my intention, my sport, a whole bunch of things, right? So natural resting length is there, and natural resting length provides us with three important things. It provides us with mechanical advantage. So you are strongest starting a muscle contraction at natural resting length. You also have increase, MM, by the way, means muscle tone. So the muscle has the most bulk at that position. And the third is that it also requires the least amount of time, T time, the least amount of time to get to a contraction. So what would happen, I'm going to keep this schematic, I'm going to keep that picture there, and I'm going to erase this, and I'm going to now, let's stretch this muscle out. So we're talking about why would we want to stretch, what are the, what's safe. So now what I'm going to do is, look, I'm going to put that end plate way down here, and that means now I have to drag these muscle fibers, I have to drag them out longer. So, John, what happened to our resting length? Look how tiny it got. It's so little, right? So when you stretch a muscle out, you're actually going to reduce the mechanical advantage. You're going to reduce the muscle tone. You're going to increase the time to get to a contraction, because didn't I say you had more muscle tone, your muscle is stronger when it had all this natural resting length overlap. But now, let's say we're going to stretch this muscle. Now you have this barely overlapping. That's harder it takes more time for this muscle actually to contract. So if your muscles were stretched all the time and you're going to play tennis, your stroke might take a little bit more time. You wouldn't have as much mechanical advantage to that stroke. So let's move on now to the next board. Okay, John, I drew you a fresh motor unit here. Muscle fibers coming down, muscle fibers going up, enabling our muscle contraction. We talked about how Golgi tendon organs, GTO, and muscle spindles are both communicating to the brain, telling the brain, hey, too much tension, too much speed of stretch, right? So both of those have to do with flexibility. And then the brain is talking back to the body, to the muscle, and it's saying, hey, should I have a contraction? Yes or no? Is it safe? Right? That's what we care about. So the new piece of information that I want you to look at here, which is basically the most important point, is that before a muscle can contract, there is what's called a gamma motor neuron. Gamma motor neuron. And that gamma motor neuron pre-contracts the muscle a little bit. Otherwise, if a muscle contracted, the fibers would get soft, and then the contraction would stop. So gamma motor neurons keep tension on all these fibers as they ratchet closer together. As the muscle contraction happens, gamma motor neurons are pre-contracting the muscle a little bit so you can contract. Again, contracting, and you contract a little more. And of course, this is happening really fast. But gamma motor neurons take their cues from posture. Gamma posture. So I want to make a really important point here about stretching. Let's say in our backhand, I'm having a really hard time getting my arm, pulling it really back because my chest muscles are tight right here. It could be that gamma motor neurons are providing a little too much pre-shortening, what we call background noise, muscle background noise, muscle tension, right? And maybe gamma motor neurons, because of my posture, have learned to fire really all the time, a little bit, and have drawn this muscle, my chest muscle, my pectoralis, closer and closer. Now I have sort of this kind of like arching, hunching forward shoulder position. That's not just because I'm controlling my muscles that way. This is because gamma motor neurons have learned that this pre-shortened position is okay because it happens all the time. Now, the opposite is gamma motor neurons understand this position as well. They may understand a lot of flexibility for my backhand. So they're pulling and they're open more, they're not firing as much, and they're allowing more of the alpha motor neuron, which is the big motion motor neuron that's controlling my pectoralis muscle and when I pull through, now that's having more chance and more range of motion, functional range of motion. Okay, John, it's time for the Pro Function takeaway of the day.
Well, what did we learn today, Dean?
Well, we started with your flexibility book and your questions about flexibility and stretching. You heard on TV watching the tennis game that athletes are needing some sort of flexibility for their sport.
Right,
right?
Specific.
Yeah. So, of course, our main goal is to talk about what's functional. We talked about the different ranges of motion, active, the passive, the rehab.
Right.
But the functional one, right. So the functional one is what kind of muscle length, what kind of joint range of motion do I need for my particular sport?
Right.
Right? So what we're trying to tell our viewers is that we see people stretching in the gym, we see people stretching on TV, we see different classes, or we attend different classes, yoga or whatever, and we see other people doing things. But rather than repeating what we see, more importantly is being able to understand what's right for me and my sport, for example, tennis, or my goals.
Or goals, right. So we talked about you really need to have a goal in mind to be able to properly say, well, how should I be stretching? What am I stretching for? What's my goal to be functional in blank?
Right. And just in stretching especially, more is not always better.
Oh, definitely not.
Right.
I think we definitely learned that today. It can be damaging. And we talked about some of the times, even as an athlete, accepting that damage, but it's something you're aware of and it's for a specific purpose, like to be functional for the here and now, for a benefit.
Exactly.
It's always about that cost benefit.
Exactly. So in our follow-up show, let's demonstrate those specific stretches.
We will definitely have a follow-up episode where we will actually go over some of the most beneficial stretches.
Right.
Universally beneficial.
Right.
And how to do them, how to execute them the proper way, the functional way. So we'll have that coming soon. And I think we covered a lot today.
Yeah, we did. It was great.
And yeah, again, always remember, just because you saw it in the gym, or in this case on TV, or heard it, that doesn't mean it's legit. Always look stuff up for yourself. Look through the science.
And come to Pro Function.
Well, we do that, a lot of that for you. And we'll post. We will be posting a lot of sources as well, so you guys can dig deeper if you want to. But I think that's going to do it for us for today.
Great. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you guys soon.